All right, awesome. So, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Founder Institute Caribbean's webinar. We're here this evening to talk about how you can start a startup in the Caribbean with a global mindset. So built into that DNA is thinking globally and not just local or regionally. So, welcome to everyone. Happy Thursday evening. Excited to get this off the ground. We had around 77 registered attendees, and we're now at the halfway mark. So for those who are coming in later on, fortunately, the webinar will be recorded. Um, so I think we could dive straight into it. I'd first like to acknowledge my team here this evening. Adana John, she leads our communications. Nike Schmidt, who is doing double duty this evening. Nike is both our program manager and she's on the panel. And for those of you who are meeting me for the first time, my name is Raul and I lead the local Founder Institute chapter. So I'd like to perhaps go around the table, starting with ladies first. If you could take a couple minutes, introduce yourself to the audience, and then we'll dive into the meat of the discussion. Perhaps Grace, you'd like to go first?
Yeah, happy to. Thank you, Raul, and hi everybody. Grace Spindel, I'm the head of products for EY in the Americas. So my team is responsible for building and delivering scalable products and platforms for our clients. In addition to that hat, I also lead the Founder Institute Miami here in Florida, the pre-seed accelerator. So we work directly with early stage founders to go from zero to one. Also angel investor, primarily focused on a couple of areas. One is health and wellness, and secondly, essentially any solutions building the infrastructure for busy parents like myself. I was not always in products. I started my career in M&A, and served private equity and life sciences and healthcare. So I've worked on transactions from several millions of dollars to upwards $10 billion dollars. And then went to business school, worked at Techstars, and that was sort of my first foray, really getting close to startups and founders and all the exciting things. So after that experience, I didn't want to quite go back to M&A and be looking at cash cows. I wanted to stay close to emerging tech, which is how I found myself in product and have been in product ever since. So great to be here and really looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Grace. And I'm still wondering, with you wearing so many hats, how you fit it all. How are you juggling all of that? But I guess we'll get into that during the conversation. And happy to see that we have a few Techstars people amongst us, because I know Alois is from the Techstars community as well as I. So that's really exciting to hear. Jen, would you like to go next?
Of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Lee, and I am the Director of Relations and Business Development in ISD, Innovation Smart District in Panama. And what we're building, it's amazing. It is an ecosystem for startups, investors, academia, all the key players that are complementary to the startup ecosystem. And we're building it from Panama, building the physical infrastructure, and we have an amazing community of founders and businesses that are interested in technology as well as investors. And well, my background it's kind of architecture, but I somehow ended up in this tech world role where, I started, I will say 10 months ago, in this world, and I've learned so much and I've seen it grow with my own eyes. I've seen the startup scene very closely, and it's always like a changing one and very exciting to be part of. So I'm very excited to be part of this conversation as well, with kind of like a different perspective where things come from. My background, it's also compliance. I've had many years in compliance as well and risk management. But now I'm here as a community builder, as director of relations in startups and all the other key players that are part of this ecosystem. So thank you so much for having me, Raul, and extending the invitation to be part of this panel.
Most welcome, Jennifer. And fun fact for everyone, I had the pleasure of meeting Jen in December last year, toured the remarkable valley that they're creating, the Green Valley, just on the outskirts of the city, very close to the airport. It's amazing that it's going to be positioned as the Silicon Valley of the Americas. So really excited to dive into that conversation as well. So thanks again, Jen. Uh, Dr. Schmidt, would you like to go next?
Of course. Hi, everybody. My name is Nika Schmidt. I'm also wearing many hats tonight. Raul has already mentioned the first one. I'm the program manager for Founder Institute Caribbean. And if you decide to join us for the next cohort, we'll be super excited and we'll meet each other again. The second hat that I'm wearing is the founder hat, actually. So everything I'll be telling you tonight is something I'm experiencing myself together with Raul, my co-founder and CEO of Xborder, our payments company that settles cross-border payments in stablecoins, a very exciting topic. And the third hat that I'm wearing is the one why I'm here first and foremost, is my background as an attorney. I started practicing law in-house for more than, circa 10 years in corporate. I have a background in IP, mostly copyright law. I was working in-house at Germany's biggest collection society for music. So background in the music industry. And then I did a pivot into the digital assets and crypto space with my own firm, started my own law firm about 3 years ago, predominantly advising startups in this space, in emerging technologies, but also support with fundraising and structuring and so on and so forth. Happy to share everything I know and excited to be here and looking forward to all your questions.
Thank you so much, Nikki. And I can't emphasize how fortunate and lucky I am to have you as a partner, both at FI Caribbean and Exporter. So thanks again for being here and really excited for you to share your vast wealth of knowledge and experience with the attendees. Alois, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. So like Nikki, I wear a number of hats, both on the call and then my background, somewhat like Grace, kind of cross a couple of different verticals. So I'll say from a background standpoint, across three parts. Part one, more on the IT systems technology side. So started out systems admin on PeopleSoft, Oracle, then became a governance, risk, and compliance consultant on large ERP implementations like $150 million SAP implementation, Hyperion, et cetera. Had a designation as a CISA, a Certified Information Systems Auditor, and then left for business school, went to NYU, and then transitioned to corporate finance and capital markets. So briefly, mergers and acquisitions, investment banking at Merrill Lynch, where I worked on a couple of large multi-billion-dollar transactions, and then left and joined. They're called Stellantis now, but back then we're FCA, so makers of Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, Maserati, etc. So was a part of the global investor relations team. Worked on the Ferrari IPO, and then the last role was actually more of a treasury role, running our Mexico $2 billion a daily cash management desk. Left that, took some time off, and then transitioned to the world of entrepreneurship and VC that I'm now partaking. Started a couple of startups. The first one was accelerated through Founder Institute Waterloo. The second through Techstars Austin. And now I am leading Startup Africa Ventures, which is an ecosystem venture firm focused on catalyzing innovation ecosystems across Africa. I'm also the head of Founder Institute Minor River. So that's the Minor River chapter of the FI chapter that covers Cote d'Ivoire, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia in West Africa.
Thank you, Aloha. And I can't underscore enough how important it is for you to be here with us this evening, especially since there's so many similarities between the Caribbean's ecosystem and Africa's in terms of smaller markets, the fragmentation, um, you know, emerging, right? So we go through a lot of the similar pain points, I would say. So really excited to learn more about the ecosystem. Thank you, Alois. And Guillermo, last but not least.
All right. Thank you very much, Raul and Neki, Adana. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Well, I'm also wearing several hats. First one is, as you can see here, I'm general partner of AIDA Ventures, which is a VC fund incorporated in Delaware. And we invest in fintech, B2B infrastructure startups in Colombia and Mexico. Right now in Colombia, in Bogota. The other hat that I wear is the top local leader for Founder Institute in LATAM. Basically, well, LATAM is like a chapter that has gathered several geographies. Originally was a local leader for Colombia, but eventually after the pandemic, we started the virtual programs in Founder Institute, and we have had the opportunity of gathering, as I mentioned, several geographies. So LATAM, well, includes Colombia, Mexico, Chile, Argentina, Venezuela, sometimes Panama in some cases, Jennifer. And our next cohort is also starting soon in May. So very, very glad to be here. I was a contractor for the oil industry in Venezuela for 20 years and had a chance to visit Trinidad and, well, had a lot of coworkers from Trinidad. So I love it and really looking forward to being a witness of the launching of your cohort in the Caribbean region. And well, very glad to be here with you all tonight.
Thank you so much, Guillermo. And I'm sorry that I missed you when you were in Trinidad. So the next time you're here, we definitely need to have a beer together.
All right.
So Guillermo,
Thank you.
while I have you on mic, perhaps we can kick things off with you. So you mentioned that you invest in fintech, logistic tech, enterprise SaaS across Latin America. But from your perspective, wearing your VC hat, what tends to separate startups that successfully scale beyond their home markets with those that remain local?
Yes, that's a great question. And the answer is a single word: mindset. It's important for founders to have a mindset of creating value every single day. There is a philosopher of strategy here in Colombia called Alejandro Salazar, and he speaks of the 4 C's. The first one is creer, in English, believe. Believe that value exists and then create value and communicate it and charge it. So mindset is very important. And from the very beginning and now with the help of AI agents and all those high technology tools, you can aim at let's say, comply with regulations in a whole region, not in a single country, and probably in the whole world. All right. So mindset is probably the main factor that separates successful entrepreneurs from those that are stalled in their own geography, in their, let's say, boundaries that are sometimes set by ourselves. So, to answer your question, a single word: mindset.
I love that, Guillermo. And I know at Founder Institute, part of our application process entails the DNA entrepreneur assessment, and which I think aims to get to exactly what you're talking about, identifying if the founder has that right mindset. Because oftentimes at the very early stages, the idea isn't as important as the DNA composition of the founder. Thanks for raising that. Nikki, we'll pivot to you. You're in Germany. The world in Europe is vastly different than it is in emerging markets such as our own. But I know that you also work with founders who build cross-border products, and you encounter challenges with regards to regulations, and they sometimes pose a barrier pretty early on. So, what are the most common legal or regulatory blind spots that you see founders missing when designing products that are meant to operate across multiple jurisdictions?
Yeah, great question. And yes, I am in Germany, but in my experience, these challenges are the same across the board globally. So no matter where you are, you will have to ask yourself the following questions, or have the following in mind. So what I see mostly is three, not mistakes, but maybe blind spots. And these are the same questions over and over that are asked over and over again. The first sounds pretty simple and obvious. It's not understanding how your product is regulated, especially if you are in a heavily regulated market, such as fintech, or in some kind of healthcare or medical space. If you touch on that, if you want to sell anything that I don't know, like supplements or something that is might be considered a pharmaceutical in certain countries, etc. You just have to keep in mind that that is heavily regulated, and you have to really understand, what challenges that might cause from a legal perspective. Do you need a license for that, etc., etc. Again, sounds very obvious, but we all know that as founders, we start with ideas, and ideas change, we pivot, and sometimes, it's important to take a step back and ask yourself again, like, what are we really doing, and what is the actual product, and what challenges might there be? And the second one is also kind of basic, but also very important to keep in mind, is that which law applies to your products or your services, because people often think, we're incorporated in the US, so we're fine. In the US, it's fine. But you have to keep in mind that you have to abide by the laws in the jurisdictions where your customers are as well. So that's the second kind of blind spot that I come across a lot with founders. So that's something to keep in mind as well. And if you're thinking, especially when you start out in a small market, right, going cross-border is something that you have to think about very early on, because your market is probably a bit too small. But not only in small countries, it's true for a lot of countries in the world, is that you want too much too early. Of course, every founder believes in their product and wants to launch globally immediately, but this is something that is very difficult to achieve, at least in a very early stage. So Google can roll out their products worldwide in one day, but as a startup, this is very difficult to achieve. So I think founders need to have a pragmatic approach in this, and start in a core market and then work step by step from there. I think these are the three blind spots that I come across the most in my conversations with founders.
I like that, Nikki. So test and validate in your local or regional markets before looking at scaling. And then once you do decide to take that step and you're on that growth trajectory, you want to ensure that you have really good legal counsel, right? And not just Googling what are the regulations in a different market, but that internally you are prepared legally and well structured to face those challenges as you grow and scale. So thanks for sharing that, Nikki. So as we move from Europe now onto the African continent, Alois, I know that you do work extensively with the African startup ecosystem, and I mentioned earlier on, that the African continent and the Caribbean markets, we share a lot of similarities, right? From dealing with smaller domestic markets to fragmented capital. So from your perspective, what are some of the lessons that you see Africa's startup ecosystem learning, experiencing that could possibly help or guide founders in the Caribbean to think a little bit more globally, as we look at launching.
Right. So a slightly more nuanced approach that what Nikki just spoke to, which is while it's important to use the Peter Thiel thought, which is try to get a local monopoly and then try to scale, start with a smaller market and then try to scale. Even when you are starting locally, at least in the case of the African startups that have been successful, you're thinking globally. So you're trying to identify a local problem that has global scale, and you're building with that in mind. And that includes, modular design of your products. That includes flexible designs of payments and distribution, because the continent you will run into instances of different currency from one market to another market, different regulations, different infrastructure challenges. And so from the very beginning, as you're thinking about your product or your business, you have to think about it from that context. Yes, you're starting local within your own country, but how do you then move to the next neighboring country, and how do you then move across your sub-region and across the entire continent, and then be able to scale across the globe? And so that's, so it's not entirely forgetting the local mindset, but it's instead of being local first, you're thinking from a global scale first while focusing on the local problem.
I like that. So it's more about how you approach the execution. So in your blueprints, in your plan, you already have a global plan, and then you sort of work backwards in terms of identifying, okay, those first steps, let me tackle the local action points first and check those boxes. But that already fits into a more global structure that you've already sort of fleshed out.
Yes. So I mean, kind of like we say, now putting on my founder's hat when I was a founder, don't boil the ocean, right? Don't try to bite off too much at the same time. So you're still not boiling the ocean, but your North Star is global.
Right, right. Got it, got it. So thanks for that, Alois. Really appreciate it. So Grace, shifting gears a little bit, you wear two primary hats in terms of leading product at EY, and you also lead the Founder Institute Miami chapter. Um, so given your expertise in product specifically, what are some of the most common product mistakes that you see founders making right now when they try to design a product for the global market?
Yeah, so Aloha mentioned this already, but one of the number one killers is really trying to boil the ocean instead of owning a wedge, right? A lot of founders start with, I'm building a global X platform, and that's almost always too broad. And if you think about the companies that win, they do the exact opposite. Take Airbnb, for example. They didn't start as a global travel platform. They literally started with a very specific use case, renting air mattresses in San Francisco during conferences. And that doesn't mean that your vision shouldn't be big, right? The vision, the North Star, it's going to be big, but focus on that one problem that is universal. Yeah, so it has to be a very big problem, but don't try to solve many problems. And this is something that we focus on in Founder Institute as well, right? Pick one problem, solve it for one customer, have a solution for that one problem, one customer, and pick one revenue stream to begin with. Don't try to boil the ocean. And as you go and validate all these different parts of your startup, then maybe you'll have to pivot. But testing everything all at once, it just doesn't work, right? Another great example is Canva. They didn't build for all creatives. They built for people who aren't designers. That was sort of their first set of customers. So Again, a lot of founders start with building for too many people. Just, try not to boil the ocean and start with owning a specific wedge. I think the other common mistake too that I see is ignoring how distribution actually works in different markets. So, and so maybe one example here is Uber. The core product is consistent, but payments is adapted across different markets, right? Cash versus card, the driver incentives. Nika talked about regulatory a little bit earlier. So even if the product is global, the adoption is always local because consumer behaviors, interest, incentives, they're all different from one market to market. And then maybe the last thing that I'll kind of speak to is your some people kind of optimize for global scale before proving product market fit. So, they get a little bit traction, they get really excited, and they're like, I'm ready to expand to the next market. You really want to make sure that you've proven product market fit before you scale. Otherwise, you end up scaling the wrong set of things. So I think those are the most common ones, but if I were to sort of rank the biggest one, it's boiling the ocean.
I really like that, Grace. I think what stood out for me is that power of one, identify one problem, one solution, one feature, one revenue stream, and that's your starting point. So yeah, really, really good insights there. Thanks a lot for that, Grace. Jennifer, moving over to Panama. So, at the Innovation Smart District, you are literally building the Silicon Valley of the Americas, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious to find out from you, the role that you see these innovation hubs playing to sort of not just help startups in your own home country, but to plug startups and founders from across the region so that they can access global markets. What really is the role of an innovation hub?
Excellent question. I think, building this infrastructure comes from like a very basic sentiment that is everyone wants to be happy, right? And if you have the right infrastructure where you are happy, you have a good place to live, it's green, it's beautiful, you have good sidewalks, you have good infrastructure, you have the best school for your kids to go to, it is safe, and it's enjoyable, right? This, and you have on top of that, of course, you have a hub of innovation, an epicenter where you can connect with the greatest minds, with the greatest corporations as well. So that's, from that basic need of we want to be happy as humans, right? So building this infrastructure of a smart city, of course, it's important. And on top of that, the idea and the vision that we had from that, it was rooted in, the Silicon Valley. We had discussions with our marketing director who doesn't like to refer to Silicon Valley of Latin America. However, I think it's good, to make that relation because it's kind of like rescuing the ideology of what Silicon Valley is, but bringing it in a context of Latin America. And it's always important to bring context to things. So, of course, we're not going to replicate exactly, building exactly what Silicon Valley is, but more of that mindset that Guillermo was speaking about of you have a good place where you can connect with other founders, with investment, venture capitalists, and you have this ecosystem where you can grow. So as ISD, our role is to give all the opportunities, including infrastructure. And there's this kind of like you would think in a why build an infrastructure when the world is very digital. There are companies who are remote first, and they don't require a physical location. But I think it's important as we're building this amazing ecosystem, which is taps on all the regions of Latin America to also have this physical place where it's like their home, right? Like you can travel, you can do business everywhere, but you have a place to connect with that ecosystem in one place. Latin America, it's big, it's very different region to region, and what we're trying is to translate it in a very universal language that is ISD. It's, the infrastructure that we're having and we're creating. And we know it's a very ambitious thing to build, such an amazing infrastructure, but we're doing it. And I think as all the process of other, startups, we're validating this product because there is a need in Latin America as a whole. And yeah, we're very happy to be part of this, and we're very open also to modify, keep moving, and we're, as Grace mentioned, focusing on one thing, and it's solving that issue that we don't have a place in Latin America where you can find that talent, where you can find investment for Latin American countries. So we're solving that big issue that is very global, in our region, but also emerging markets. It's not only Latin America, of course, African countries have that same problem of, having to reach out to, let's say, North America for funds. And what we're trying is to kind of like democratize a little bit. And, we're more than 650 million people in Latin America, and there's a lot of talent, there's a lot of money, and that it's waiting for the right opportunity. And I think we're creating that opportunity by building, this ecosystem and also building the infrastructure as well, which is very important, I think.
Love that, Jennifer. I think beyond the physical infrastructure, what really attracts me to the hub
Yeah.
is the sense of community, because I think, post-pandemic, we have seen a proliferation of remote first startups, and founders tend to work in isolation. Recently, I did a podcast with Samantha Best, and we touched on mental health and wellness and well-being. And that's a real problem for founders, right? So I think, an added benefit I would say to the Innovation Hub is that sense of community, and having that support by being around like-minded individuals. So I see tremendous value in that. So thanks for
Of
sharing
course.
that, Jen.
And also, we're building it, just to add a little bit, we're building it in a very strategic country, which is Panama. It has a lot of benefits that I can talk about later. But, geographically, it's amazingly positioned. It's the air hub of America. And also logistically, because of Panama Canal, and it holds more than 100 multinationals here in Panama because of the strategic geographic position. So that is one advantage that we have going on, and having that hub of innovation, that epicenter of innovation in the middle of the continent. It's just beautiful. It's like
Yeah.
it was perfectly planned.
Love it, love it. And fun fact,
Yeah.
Panama was once part of Greater Colombia. So shifting the
Yeah.
conversation back to Colombia and Guillermo. Guillermo, so at AIDA Ventures, you operate almost with a hybrid venture capital slash venture studio model. So what are some of the biggest operational gaps that you typically see in early stage founders? Who are coming especially from emerging markets? And second to that, how can Caribbean founders address them early if they want to build globally competitive companies?
Yes, well, this is very well connected to our first question that we were discussing. And maybe what you just mentioned about the DNA assessment, this test to assess your strengths, your weaknesses, your, let's say, opportunities to grow, it's the very beginning of the paradigm of a venture studio. Now, when you talk about gaps, for example, we have, let's say, identified that founders tend to work a lot on features of their products, but they don't pay close attention to the distribution engine, for example. This is one of the gaps that can be addressed in a venture studio platform or model. Because, I mean, in our opinion, the product is necessary, but it's like a 50% of, let's say, your concern. Your job is to distribute that product, and especially like Grace and Alois and Jennifer and Nike also were saying, you need to focus on, and you also mentioned one revenue stream and one problem to be solved and to be, let's say, validated with your MVP. Okay, so well, in a venture studio, we give you a set, a set of let's say support. We support the launching of your product, but one thing that needs to be addressed, as I mentioned, is the distribution. I mean, that is 50% half of the success of your MVP. Okay, this is probably the main gap. Okay, not being concerned about distribution and the go-to-market strategy, basically.
Yeah, so you know, the best of us can build a product that we think, you know, is a groundbreaking idea, but to your point, if there's no market for it, or if there is a market but you don't even know how to access that market, that's the gap that you're identifying, and that's the role that you see the venture studio helping to play. So yeah, I appreciate those insights, Guillermo. Thank you, thank you. Nikkei, back to you. You know, so in our inaugural cohort at FI Caribbean, we had a few fintech founders, and I know that you work at that intersection of regulation, product, and operations, more so in the fintech space with regards to global payments. So how do you see founders being able to design products from day one that are both globally scalable and legally resilient? Because we touched on, you know, the multiple jurisdictions. So let's dive a little bit deeper into that.
Sure, let's do it. Yeah, I think I can build on what Guillermo just said, actually, and it's coming through or shining through what everybody has mentioned already. It's getting the fundamentals right and building the right foundation and move from there. And that is also true for the legal side of things. Yeah, as I mentioned, like understanding the product, understanding what the market looks like, what the legal situation looks like, is important early on, even if you're moving slowly, but you have to kind of have that global view from the start. Even if you move a bit slower than you probably want as a founder, we always want to move faster, right? What I would say is get the fundamentals right. Stay out of the kill zone. I like to put the problems into like 3 buckets, more or less, like kill zone, Amber Alert, that's kind of the yellow flashlight, and the greenish zone that is great to have but doesn't kill the startup. And for the fintech or payment space, because you've asked about it, is do I need a license for what I'm doing? What kind of license do I need? Do I need a federal license, a state license? All these things you have to really start drilling down into the local laws. And yeah, do I infringe any patents? Do I have the right? What's my company called? Do I infringe any trademarks? And all these very, very basic fundamental things that we have to think about, because just mentioning that's not fintech, but I think everybody heard this story about what was it called at the beginning? Claude-bot, and now it's called OpenClaw. And I heard the founder, Peter Steinberger, in a podcast telling that he got some letters from the lawyers from Anthropic who were not amused about him using a name that sounded very much like their own brand name. So I would say that's part of the stay out of the kill zone. Be careful about trademarks. check if your domain is available, etc., etc. If before you start building a brand, make sure everything is legally sound. And I think that the overarching principle is get the fundamentals right, and try not to tie yourself up in a lawsuit too early, because you might not survive that at the beginning.
How do you balance that, Nike, with founders who are often bootstrapping at that very early stage with being able to access legal counsel? What would be your advice as a follow-up to what you just shared?
That's, I mean, this is the conundrum that all the founders are in, right? Even if you get all the great tips, and then you nod along and say, yeah, that's great, but I cannot afford a lawyer at this point, so what am I supposed to do? So a lot of things can, of course, be researched independently, but it is really important. You don't need to hire a lawyer full time, but it's worth looking for an attorney that has experience with startups. And there are people out there, and there are services out there who are also accessible for startups, also more affordable for startups. So it is important to get some legal guidance at the beginning. Again, you don't have to hire one full time. But you should also not talk to, I don't know, your cousin's neighbor or something who studied law at some point, and helps you for free, because that might hurt you too. So it's really important to get these first things right, and not make irreversible mistakes at the beginning that are either really irreversible or actually super important, super expensive to correct.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I see it more as then, from day one, surround yourself or build a nice or a good cadre of mentors, advisors, people that you can tap into, that you don't necessarily have to pay, but are there to sort of guide you and advise you.
And often, I mean, big law firms, they have sometimes pro bono events for startups. There are all kinds of accelerator programs all around the world that have some office hours, for example, right? Founder Institute has that as well. So educate yourself on what resources are out there for you. And there are resources out there.
Awesome. Thank you. And going forward, for founders in our ecosystem, they can tap into Nike as a mentor. So I appreciate you for that. Thanks a lot. Alois, shifting gears back to you in Africa. One of the programs that I recently started was Connector Caribbean. It's funded by IDB Lab in partnership with the European Union. But it's being executed by Bridge for Billions. And they also have a Connector Africa program. So building on that model where they are more focused on the entrepreneurship support organizations, who in turn support the founders. Your model is similar in a sense where you're combining ecosystem building, venture building, and venture funding. So tell me a little bit more about why building stronger founder pipelines and ecosystems is so critical to producing globally scalable startups, especially from emerging markets.
Right. So part of why we set out to do that approach was that less than 1% of global venture capital comes to Africa. I mean, the average is from 2019 till early this year, averages around 3.1, even though last year was closer to 4.2. But the reason for that is twofold. One is the pipeline, and the other is liquidity constraints. Now, both of those have an impact on building globally scalable startups, right? Because if you think about it, one of the reasons you would have a globally scalable is that startup is able to attract additional capital as it grows, right? After it hits product market fit, that allows it to scale. But if if there are constraints in attracting capital globally because of liquidity or exit options, then that impacts the stocks. Similarly, the pipeline, the number of quality founders that you have because some of those founders may end up joining an existing company, being part of a founding team. That also helps, the startup scale. So said differently, globally scalable startups aren't built in isolation, right? It's dependent on an ecosystem. It's dependent on mentors that help them early not to, make the certain mistakes that are avoidable. Nikkei kind of spoke to some of those around the legal setup. Just as you can have technical debt in a product, you can have, I guess you can call it legal debt in terms of how you go about your incorporation, in terms of your cap table, et cetera, et cetera. And that can become a whole mess, especially when you're trying to raise money, the cap table, especially when you have dead weight or so on the cap table. So that's one of the main reasons, because you need those mentors, you need that ecosystem, you need, access to investors, and so that's why it's critical, to go about it, especially in emerging markets, more from an ecosystem approach. And if you take, what you're doing in Colombia, right, with the venture studio, across the continent, what we found is that the Silicon Valley model really doesn't work if you just copy it and paste it, because the founders here need a lot more hand-holding, with capacity building, a lot more hand-holding, ensuring that they de-risk, appropriately. That's, from the team execution risk to the product technical risk, to the market demand risk, to the economic financial risk. And because once you have, that more evolved approach, it is much easier to attract capital coming in to work with those startups.
Sorry, my screen just just jumped. Thanks for that, Alois. I think one of the things that you mentioned that really stood out though is you know the access to the resources, the liquidity crisis, um, and what we're seeing trending now though could possibly positively impact that uh where we're seeing more AI native startups being born, leveraging AI agents. So the need to have a lot of funding at the start isn't as critical as it was maybe 2, 3 years ago, where you definitely need to have some cash in the bank to get anything off the ground. Um, so hopefully it has a good impact on our markets. Do you see it like that as well?
I, I I think it would help somewhat, though a lot of the cost isn't necessary product costs, right? Or product development costs. A lot of the costs it has to do with friction that you probably have in the value chain as a whole, especially with distribution. And so while it would lessen the cost of product development, it may not necessarily lessen the costs associated with, go to market, distribution channels, etc.
I gotcha. So it's a bit of a trade-off, it doesn't alleviate all of your funding challenges, but certainly a major aspect of it, which is the product. And on that note, it'll be a good transition back to Grace, whose forte is in product. So Grace, a lot of founders build products, and rightfully so, for local users first. We spoke about, the power of one, identifying one product, one problem, one revenue stream, one feature set. Um, so from your perspective, how can founders validate a problem locally while still ensuring that the product can scale globally?
I think the key is to think in terms of local proof, but global pattern, right? So we talked about
I think we're going to make a meme out of that. I like that. We're going to coin that local proof. I like that.
yeah, I think, when we say like start local, that doesn't mean that this problem is small, right? You need to be thinking about the applicability of that problem across the board. So you have to ask yourself, is this problem uniquely local for just, for myself, for just Floridians, or is it a local version of something that exists basically everywhere? I mean, you and Nikkei are both in fintech, so take payments friction, for example. Everyone, that's a problem for everybody. Access to services, problem for everybody. Coordination challenges, problem for everybody. So when you're still validating, you're building for the realities of your local market, but you have to ask yourself, do those conditions exist in other markets? I think Rappi is probably a great example of that, right? They built for the realities of Latin America market, but they didn't necessarily build something that's local only. They build something that's locally grounded but is relevant for more than just Latin America market. I think the other piece too is, you can't just jump from local to global, overnight. You have to think about expanding to that one next market. What is that not one next market? Not the entire world. Pick one adjacent market that's similar behavior, similar constraints, strong network access, that is as close as possible to the market that you're currently operating in. And the chances of you succeeding in that market is probably higher than just jumping into a completely different market. Um, those are some of the things that, I think founders will need to think about. You don't need to start global. You need to start with a problem that's locally intense, and you validate that with your ICPs locally, but it has to be globally repeatable. You have to be able to answer that question pretty early on. If you get that right, scaling becomes more of a sequencing problem. Like, where do I go next?
I like that. I like that. So, ensuring that whatever problem that you're solving has a global market, but in validating that problem, you want to start with your local community. But knowing that people across the world experience similar problems. So once you know how to solve it, then you can get on the train of trying to solve it for other markets. Great insights, Grace. Thank you so much. So Jennifer, we'll actually end this part of the webinar with you, and then we'll transition to Q&A. So you touched on earlier on, Jen, that Panama, given its geographic location, is a hub for the Americas. It's a huge transshipment point as well, connecting the Americas as a whole. Um, so it is a gateway for international business already, right? But what are some of the advantages from your point of view? You're on the ground, you're there. Do you think that locations like Panama can offer to startups that want to operate across Latin America and the Caribbean?
Excellent question. Well, first of all, I I love that we run in the ideology that um we should not be alone. Building a community, it is first, and that means also touching and extending to other ecosystems in other regions of Latin America, because the more the merrier and better. If the ecosystem in El Salvador it gets bigger, then it's better for all the region of Latin America. So I think that's very important. Although Panama has very unique benefits, as I mentioned, geographic position, it's very business driven, so much so that, it already has a lot of benefits for entrepreneurship, to have and start their business in Panama with a lot of benefits. Um, from, for example, my perspective, from what we've been working on in ISD, we have the whole project holds the free zone licensing, right? And that means that on top of, being a very international country, I would say Panama is a very international country. We add more benefits so we can connect to other regions. For example, if you have your startup register in Panama, you can also, have some tax exemptions, some migration benefits for your team, etc. So you know, I think the countries and the other ecosystems have to think globally. I mean, I don't know if other regions will have the same advantages as Panama, but that's why we're building for Latin America and not only for Panama, because, we want to have or give the same opportunities for other regions as Mexico, as El Salvador, Nicaragua, Honduras, all these places that may not have the same, let's say, tax benefits and migration benefits, where they can still work remotely, have their, hub in Panama, some sort of say, and kind of like tapping into what Grace said, you know, if you start in your own region, right, in Latin America, it's easier with kind of like this community backing you up and this ecosystem where you can, where is the next similar country where or market where I can expand my business and not, I'm gonna expand to all Latin America, like just because, but very strategically, okay, so I'm in El Salvador, which other country kind of like has the same I would say like perspective or the same issues, which we all share in Latin America, and that's kind of like the beauty and the not so great about it. That we have the same problems in different levels, but we share that, right? We are all as a whole an emerging market, and so there's a lot of opportunity to scale in the region of Latin America, and yeah.
Thanks for that, Jen. Yeah, I mean, having been there myself and witnessing it firsthand, ease of access to such a large market certainly helps, especially as a founder as you're now kicking off. We look at the Caribbean and we think it's a big market, but just the fact that you're dealing with so many different islands and then there are connectivity challenges. We don't always have direct flights or direct shipping routes. So certainly being in the Americas and having that market access helps. All right, so we're actually surprisingly doing really good on time. So thank you all to the panelists. Really enjoyed this conversation. We have sufficient time now for Q&A. Adana, I wasn't managing the chat, so I'll lean on you a little bit to guide me on any of the pressing questions, or we could ask attendees to raise their hand or just unmute. But Adana, I'll allow you to help me sort of moderate that
So
part.
we've had some convo going on here in the chat. I see that Osman, I don't know if he wants to raise his hand if he has a particular question. He's saying, for first-time founder without much understanding in business, what are key things they need to know early on and areas to focus on? And then we have Linda with another question.
Okay, let's take Osman first. Okay, so can you repeat the question? And any one of the panelists, feel free to unmute and jump in.
Yeah, it says for first-time founder without much understanding in business, what are key things they need to know early on and areas to focus on?
Anyone?
I mean, I would say the biggest thing is what problem are you trying to solve, right? And is that problem painful enough for a large number of persons that it does provide a market opportunity for you to pursue? So it's more identifying the problem set and by extension, the target customers that you will be solving that problem for. But yeah, it's zeroing in on the problem, trying to build a business or build a product in itself without focusing on what you're solving for. I think it's, putting the cart before the horse.
Thanks for that, Alois. Grace, you want to add to that?
Yeah, just to pile onto that, a lot of founders skip validation, especially nowadays with vibe coding, right? So it does make it easier to build, but it also makes it so much easier to make mistakes because a lot of people just kind of build a prototype, ship it, but skips the validation part, which is super critical because you don't want to get too deep into something like Alawa said, you have to define what the problem is. You have to have enough number of people. You have to know that it's a big enough market. But kind of going beyond, how many people are experiencing this pain. You have, as part of your validation, you have to ask whether or not people are willing to pay for it. So not just, yeah, this is a pain for me, because a lot of people, to be honest, can say like, yes, this is a pain for me, but it doesn't always translate into willingness to pay. So that's one thing that's key is in your validation, it's not just who experiences this pain and how big is that market that experiences this pain. Is it painful enough that people are actually willing to pay for that pain to go away?
Wonderful. Thanks, Grace. Before we move on to the next question, Jen, Nike, Guillermo, would you like to add to that, or is it okay for us to move on? Yeah. All right. Adana, next question. You're on mute, Adana. Okay.
Yeah.
Still on mute.
Yeah. Yeah, my laptop was just sticking a bit. Sorry about that. So now we have Linda. She said my husband and I are in the process of setting up a pay-per-view streaming platform. We plan to launch first in the Caribbean, where we are based in Dominica, and then expand into Africa. We are currently facing challenges with banking, third-party payment gateways, financial infrastructure, and networking. Could anyone offer guidance or support in these areas?
That's a big ask. I open the floor.
I want to chime in here because she has so many, doubts and questions. I would say from my perspective, one of the biggest pain points for founders and, people who have this great idea, it's that they're alone in their own idea and they, as Grace said, they miss the part of validation, right? So it's good to have good mentorship. So I would suggest kind of like find this community in your local ecosystem or expand to other ecosystems in the area where you have a community that can give you real feedback, and it's a feedback that it's not, by your friends or family that are there. They don't know about what it takes to build a startup, kind of like what I'm trying to say is surround yourself with other founders so you kind of like get a little bit of that mentality of what needs to be done, and also find good mentorship to, in those specific areas that you're trying to get. If you need, support in, you have challenges with banking, try to find a mentor that, are willing to sit with you, have a coffee, and, talk about these specific challenges and give you kind of like some light of where to go. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Jen. Guillermo, would you like to add?
Yes, well, there is a suggestion for Linda, right? I think Linda was the person
Yes.
asking. Okay, well, join the next cohort of Founder Institute, where you will find support for all those inquiries and answer to all those questions. But basically, a global community that can also be of great support. I mean, we have a network in Founder Institute of more than 25,000 professionals all over the world, and we have also clusters that could also provide specific advice. I mean, we have clusters, for instance, in this case, for this streaming business specialist and also, well, specialists in finance and advisors that could eventually become members of your board of advisors. So, well, join the next cohort of the Founder Institute and find answers to your questions.
Thanks, Guillermo. And I saw in the chat Jason Butcher is already volunteering to help her out. Jason, thanks for that. You're such a great guy. Jason is one of our day one, mentors and day one supporters. So really happy to have him here in the ecosystem and volunteering of his time. Thanks a lot, Jason. Adama,
Roll,
would you like to go on to the
yeah.
next? Yeah.
Yeah, Francis has had his hand raised for a while now. So, Francis, you could unmute, and then I'll go to Delano's question in the chat. I don't know if he has access to unmute. Francis.
Let me search for him and see if I could.
And I saw his hand raised for quite a
Yeah,
while.
his hand is raised, but I'm unable to. There's no option for me to unmute him. So,
Would be able to
Francis, can you
unmute.
drop your question in the chat then, and we'll read it off?
Yeah, so in the meantime, while he does that, we could answer Delano's question.
Yes.
Delano wants to know if you would say would you say there's adequate non-dilutive funding, so like government support available to founders in the Caribbean? And how important is non-dilutive funding in helping those founders? You all got the question, or you want me to repeat?
Can repeat.
Okay, so he wants to know, would you say there's adequate non-dilutive funding, so like government support available to founders in the Caribbean? And how important is non-dilutive funding in helping those founders?
Anyone would like to take that question? If not, I could jump in, get the ball rolling.
So I'm
Remember-
not familiar with funding in the Caribbean. I can't answer the first part of the question. The second part, which is how important is non-dilutive. I mean, take as much of it as you can, right? You want to protect that equity. So to the extent that you do have access to non-dilutive funding, absolutely take it. In the US, we've got grants, we've got certain universities that provide non-dilutive capital to student-founded startups. There are sources here. Again, can't speak to what the sources are in Caribbean, but if you have the opportunity, grab those because that will enable you to keep as much equity as possible for much longer.
Yeah, and just to touch on the first part of the question, if there's adequate non-dilutive funding, there's never adequate funding anywhere. So we could always do it more. That said, I think your primary source for non-dilutive funding in our market would be from the development banks. So if you look at the Inter-American Development Bank, the Development Bank of Latin America and the Caribbean, which is CAF. There's the Caribbean Development Bank, the Development Bank of Jamaica. I can't say with any certainty about each country's or government's what they have. But locally here in Trinidad and Tobago, we have state agencies like NEDCO and so some of these state agencies offer non-dilutive funding. That said, I would also like to add that it comes at a big price. And the price is these grant opportunities take a lot of time. It takes technical grant writing skills. So it's very patient capital. So if you're a founder and you need to launch ASAP, applying for a grant and waiting for 12 months for a response may not be the ideal way to go. So my advice would be to pursue all options and not just grant funding. Anybody else want to touch on that before we move on?
Yeah. So in the African context, we actually are pushing the opposite. We're pushing founders because most of the funding to date has been non-dilutive funding. That's been mostly grants from developmental agencies, from FDIs, and so forth. That had the negative effect of building within many of the founders, we'll say, a degree of laziness, right? The necessary structures with which they should be running their businesses, because they didn't have essentially no accountable voice tied to that capital. And so there is a concerted effort, essentially a mental model shift, to move away from grant. Now there are non-dilutive funding that's not grant, that still has some accountability. I know, I think it's called STV, just developed a new instrument called NICE, NICE, but it's more tied to revenue producer startups. But it also is equity linked, but it's non-dilutive. So that type of non-dilutive funding is welcome, because there's still accountability. The founders are still more oriented on ensuring that they build in the necessary structures and systems as they to go about building their ventures, versus where a lot of what it had been in the past was either grant writing or going to pitchathons, pitching and getting a grant.
Thanks for sharing those insights, Alois. Adana, in the interest of time, maybe we can move on. I see two hands up, and then there are three questions in the Q&A. So
Yeah, and when I see Francis sent his question,
you can guide.
hello, Rod, I think you're sticking, or is it that I am sticking?
Yeah. You can
Yeah,
go ahead,
can you hear
Adana.
me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, yeah. So Francis is directing his question to Nikki. He's saying the government of Ghana and the Bank of Ghana put out policy documents on digital assets. Digital currency, crypto is now legal in Ghana, etc. Please, as social entrepreneur, I want to build a business around digital assets in Ghana, but don't know how and where to start from. Any advice? Nikki, would you like me to go over any part of the question, or yeah, good.
Yeah, sure. I can answer that, or try to. Just as a preface, I mean, it's for me, it's amazing to see how many countries in the world are now embracing digital assets, and see that this is probably the future of payments. So that said, I'm not familiar with the concrete legislation or the documentation that's been put up by the government in Ghana. But I think, I mean, digital assets is a very wide space. So it's true for that space, as it's true for all other products and services. You have to decide what you want to do exactly. So what does your product look like? It is very different to create a crypto exchange than to just launch an NFT project. So there's all in the digital asset space. So it depends very much on what you want to do, because the levels of regulation globally, as far as I know them, they're relatively similar, and they vary depending on what it is that you're doing. So it's a bit difficult to give some very general advice, but what I can say is drill down on what you're trying to build, and then take it from there. Happy to stay in touch afterwards, and I can try and find you a colleague in Ghana who might be able to help you.
Or maybe Alois can.
or even Alois, of course. I have a colleague in Nigeria, but maybe she has a contact as well.
I mean, sure, he can reach out to me, and I should have folks in Accra I can connect him with.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Nikki and Alois.
In fact, I was just in Accra all of last week.
Good stuff. Good stuff. All right, Adana, who's next? I see two questions on the Q&A still.
Yes,
Have those been addressed as yet?
Anthony, another legal question. He wants to know the key legal areas we have to focus on within the Caribbean and where is the best place to find resources. He's saying a lot of businesses are incorporated in the US, doing corporations in the Caribbean have disadvantages. And how do we address trademark and patent requirements in our region?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of questions. I'll try my best. Okay, let's see. The key legal areas. Again, it's a bit difficult to give generic advice if I don't know what you're planning to do exactly. In terms of incorporation, incorporation in the US is very popular because it's easy and it's relatively affordable. It gives you legal status in a very established jurisdiction. That is a very interesting for investors, or it gives investors a very convenient and also familiar legal environment, and also customer facing. It can be an advantage to be incorporated in the US. Also, banking has been mentioned. I think that might also be easier in the US to operate the business from the US. So that's probably one of the main reasons why incorporation in the US is so popular, and why so many startups do it. I'm trying to get back to that, or the third question. Trademark and patent requirements in our region. So these laws, they differ from country to country, obviously. So it depends, of course, on the country that you're in. Trademark law in general works either for local regions. You can have a local trademark, but you can also have a more global trademark for more jurisdictions. So that varies in price, of course, and so you would have to check what the target markets are for you, and if it's worth investing into a broader trademark right from the start. Trademark research and registering your trademark is often one of the legal costs that are worth spending, because once you start to build a brand around it, it might be difficult to switch, and this is something you don't want to spend too much headspace and money on later on, while you're focusing on either building the product or scaling. So that will be my recommendation, but it's again, it's regulated and on a national level, so it's always good to seek advice in the country that you're looking at.
Yeah, Nikki, thanks for that. So reach out to me on LinkedIn. I have a few people I can connect you with, but I just want to double click on something that Nikki said, because I think it's really important, right? If you're a startup, if you're at the ideation stage, all of this that you're talking about shouldn't be your focus right now. You shouldn't be spending money on those things right now. You need to validate your product through the market, right? Ensure that whatever you're building has a market we discussed it here, that's willing to purchase your service. If you are trying to do all these things before you go to market, then reach out to me and let's have a conversation, because that's not the way you should be going about it. In my experience and from my professional point of view. Can we go to the next? Who's next?
Yeah, Richard's question, it's short, but I'm not sure if he was referring. He's saying, what about intellectual protection with
Oh,
respect
sorry,
to
I wanted to add to that question a
Oh,
little
sorry
bit.
about that. Jen,
No
go
worries.
ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, of course, there are advantages on incorporating in the US, because for North American or US funds, it is easier to invest in a company that is already already registered in US. However, as Roel, of course, mentioned, and what we have talked about, it's to focus first on your local market, and that would mean, I would guess, incorporating in your own region and country. And of course, if maybe it's difficult, there's no many benefits to incorporating, let's say, in your country. Of course, the other option, and I don't want to sound, but Panama, it's an option where, what we're trying to do, it's also by, having companies from other ecosystems and regions to create and incorporate their companies in Panama, for entrepreneurship, right? The startups, because of course we have multinationals and whatnot, or big businesses, but what I'm focusing is, startups. And the important is that, when we start kind of like buying our own product, right? Like, instead of looking to US all the time, which of course has great benefits, there, as I mentioned, there's a lot of money in Latin America, and Caribbean. And part of what we are trying to do as a mission, it's, kind of like bring that visibility that there are good startups register, coming from the Caribbeans or Latin American countries, register there, and the funds, it's kind of like educating the funds that they should invest in regional, right, Latin American companies, and not forcing them to incorporate in the US, kind of like what I wanted to mention. So I don't think there are many disadvantages other than, of course, US funds invest usually in companies that are incorporated. But for example, take for example Panama, right? There's great tax migration benefits for you to have your company location or your company incorporated there. So there are options other than US, what I'm trying to say.
Awesome. Thanks, Jennifer. Alois and Grace, I'll allow you to go, and then we're just going to do like rapid fire to try to get in the 3 or 4 other questions before we sign off. Grace
Okay.
or Alois, go ahead.
Yeah. So as it relates to incorporating in the US, so twofold. On one end, if you, from the African context, 60% of all of the funds are domiciled out of the continent, and most are domiciled in Delaware, right? To begin with, and the ones on the continent are mostly domiciled in Mauritius. In fact, we, with our fund, had to do a master feeder between Delaware and Mauritius, in part because we're pursuing the Techstars partnership, and Techstars required a Delaware presence. So I gave you that context to say, for a lot of the funds on the continent, founders wanting to be backed by them will need a Delaware incorporation. However, you can incorporate anyway and change your incorporation at a later date, right? So you know the story of Facebook, originally incorporated in Florida and then moved to Delaware. Even my startup that got accelerated through Techstars Austin, we were incorporated in Charlotte and then moved to Delaware. So again, going back to the initial piece, focus on building your product, validating your, the market, and less about whether you want to go to Delaware now, because you're not necessarily lining up to get capital from a US fund right now, right? So incorporate locally, build your product, but when it's time and you do have a fund that's lined up to back you, you can then make that move at a later date.
Thank you, Alois. Grace, you wanted to add to that? I saw your hand up before.
Yeah, I was gonna call it the same thing as what Alwa already said, that, certain funds do require incorporation in the US, so that's the only thing that, I would caution. If you have a few funds in mind and those are the funds that you would need backing from, you just kind of have to check and make sure that you're cognizant of that.
Right. Good point. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Alois. Adana, you want to
Richard
tee up the
wants to
next
know
question?
what about intellectual protection with respect to your process that solves a particular problem?
Um, so again, depends on which country you're in and where you develop that intellectual property. In general, ideas, processes are not generally protected by copyright, especially if it's a very technical process. Of course, then it can be protected by patent law. But this is something, I mean, yeah, you would have to find out if it's a technical process or what kind of process it is, if it's chemical or whatever. This can all be patented, of course. But processes per se can, in most jurisdictions that I'm aware of, not be protected by copyright. Yeah, so was there any addition to that in the question, or did I cover everything? Okay.
Yeah. Thanks, Nikki.
Okay,
So
before we move on, since we're at time, I'd first like to ask the panel if it's okay if we stay on for another 5 minutes, with everyone's permission. If you do have to leave, I understand as well. But if you are available to stay, please stay.
Roddy, I have to make a hard stop right now. So, well,
Thank you,
I want to thank
Guillermo.
you for everything. All right,
Also,
thank you.
any closing thoughts before you leave, Guillermo?
Well, join the Founder Institute for our next cohort. Your next cohort is starting on May the 20th, right?
Yes.
Beautiful. It's the best place in the world to launch a company, a startup that can become a world business, a fundable world-class business.
Wonderful. Thank you, Guillermo. Really appreciate your time tonight. Have a good night.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Bye,
Adana,
Guillermo.
can we jump into there are like 3 questions in the Q&A, and I don't know if you tackled them as yet.
Yeah, well, no,
Okay.
there are like about 2 more, I think, after this one. So
Okay.
Dylan is building Kaiflu, a neobank in Guyana that lets foreign investors remotely open and manage Guyanese dollars and USD bank accounts in Guyana. I'm collecting LOIs to validate demand, but how do I tell the difference between genuine willingness to switch banks and polite social validation? I do not want to wait until I go through all these steps to get the banking partner to understand if they are really willing to switch, and an MVP still has a higher barrier to entry, is Dylan's question. It's a bit lengthy, so it's just so if he wants to know
That's
the
a tough
difference
one.
willingness and polite social validation.
Grace, would you like to take a stab at it? Should we repeat?
Yeah, yeah. I don't think I fully understand the question. If you don't mind repeating it, Dana. I'm
Yeah,
actually scrolling to look for
okay.
it.
No, no
It's
problem.
it's in the Q&A, so I'm not too sure if you'll see it. But okay, so it's hey, it's Dylan. I'm building Califlow, a neobank based in Guyana that lets foreign investors remotely open and manage Guyanese bank accounts. I'm collecting LOIs to validate demand, but how do I tell the difference between genuine willingness to switch banks and polite social validation? I do not want to wait until I go through all the steps to get the banking partner to understand if they're really willing to switch. So he sort of wants to pressure test the genuineness of the LOIs that he's getting.
So I don't know if I can necessarily say they're genuine or not. I think even in the US, right? There could be cultural differences, but I will tell you, even in the US, LOIs don't always equate to an agreement that's signed. I guess I'm just cautioning that until you actually have something signed, anything can happen. I'm not saying those LOIs don't mean anything because in a lot of cases, they do. And again, this is more from a US perspective. For instance, in the US, deep tech can raise funding based primarily on LOIs. They don't necessarily have to have shown revenues and signed with clients. So it's a little bit different from SaaS, from marketplaces, right? LOIs are typically good enough. And I'm talking about deep tech, it's, robotics or something that you deploy in the battlefield and the client is like Department of Defense, right? So very, very long contracts. Biotech is another example. So LOIs in some cases in certain sectors mean a lot of things. And in some cases it is truly just a letter of intent. Until you have what's something that's truly signed as an agreement, anything is up for grabs, anything can happen. But I can't speak to the realities of the local market that you're in on whether or not there's generally a pattern of LOIs kind of falling through or LOIs that actually end up being executed and turn into real agreements.
Yeah, so just building on that, Grace, I'll just add, build that into your plan, right? So if you've secured 100 LOIs, do an average and just sort of project that, hey, 40% of them may not sign on in the end, right? So it just becomes a numbers game, and you sort of build that into your projection model. Adana, you wanna touch on Michael? So sorry, any one of the other panelists have anything to add to that question?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
wanted to add to that. Oh, sorry. I wanted to add to that, and my recommendation would be, or kind of like make yourself this insightful question is who you're asking for, to validate the demand. Is it friends and family or close people, or you're actually asking the right people? I think it's very important to know if you're asking the right people to validate this demand, or if you're, just collecting LOIs because you think it's a necessary step that you need to do. So I think with that, you would, question whether you're reaching out to the right people or you're just collecting LOIs, which is not helpful, if you are, then you're gonna have these questions of, am I actually validating my product, or am I just collecting LOIs? So yeah, I would say kind of like find that kind of like specific people, and not, just someone that it's at hand, but look for ecosystems where you can validate this as well. I think, and I say it from experience because that's what we do at ISD. Part of the problem is that startups, they need to validate their product, and they need to do it through a very critical eye, as well. So mentorship, like surround yourself with people who actually know what they're doing and not just um, collecting LOIs.
Thanks for that, Jen. Alua, wanted to add?
yeah. So really quickly, think of it as a sales process, right? I mean, bottom line, you're running a sales process, and so, Raul, if you think about VC Lab, for example, right? Even from a fund manager standpoint, you go after packs, and then you convert those packs, to LPAs, and then you close on the capital when the money hits the bank. This is no different to what Jennifer said. You would have qualified your pipeline, who exactly you're reaching out to at the top of your funnel, right? So your LOI is like the middle of your funnel. Your next thing is to convert that LOI to a MSA, a master service agreement of some sort, right? In many instances, only a fraction of your LOI will convert. And so you will build that into your funnel, and you'll build the timeline and everything that you're working against and kind of push against it. So I wouldn't worry too much of which one of them may be just being socially polite or not. Just execute your process and stay, and as long as you know what you're pushing for in terms of timeline, the number of conversions, etc., you can reasonably anticipate what your conversion will be at the end.
Yes, spot on, Alua. Thanks for that. Adana, is Michael's question next?
He says, from your perspective, what are the most common IP mistakes founders make, and what separates advice from real operating support that matters?
Yeah, great questions. The most common IP mistakes. The most common mistake I see is that nobody knows who owns the IP. I mean, you start with somebody as a co-founder, and it might be a technical person who writes all the software. And under law, that person then owns the software personally, for example, right? And nobody thinks about assigning that IP to the company itself, not to the person themselves personally, so to speak. So that's one of the biggest mistakes that I see. You have to make sure that the IP that is created, that can be software, that can be any other IP you can think of, is really owned by the company, and for that you need an assignment to the company, because there might be a conflict, but it doesn't have to be a conflict. It might just be that your CTO leaves the company because other obligations, takes on a different job, whatever it is, and the IP is gone. And yeah, that's one of the points that I would say is stay out of the kill zone, because that's kind of very close to the kill zone if you don't own the IP. So that's the most common mistake I see. The second question was, what separates advice from real operating support that matters? Yeah, great question. So advice is, I think, probably referred to here as more general advice. And I know how everybody always hates it when lawyers say, yeah, it depends, but it is it is unfortunately the case that it really depends on the case and on the specific situation, on the jurisdiction, on the product, on the market, etc., etc. So what separates it is pretty simple. It's liability, right? So if you really hire a lawyer, then the lawyer is liable for the advice that they give you. And if they're not hired or paid, or if there's no real professional relationship established, then there's no liability. So I think that's what separates it. Yeah, I think it boils down to that. And if you want real legal support, then you have to have a lawyer who is actually liable for what they're doing. That would be my advice.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nikki. Anyone else from the panel would like to touch on that before we move on? Okay. Adana, you want to queue
Yeah,
up the next question?
any thoughts from the panel on crowdfunding in the Caribbean?
May not be able to address the Caribbean specifically, but we could certainly talk about crowdfunding. I mean, I'm here. I don't even know of any local crowdfunding platforms. The platforms that we use are the international ones from the US. So that'll be my first point. My second point would be usually people donate with a credit card. And then, here in the Caribbean, we have challenges accessing foreign exchange. We don't have a huge credit card holding population as well, so that might limit how people can contribute. But happy to let the panel weigh in on how crowdfunding in general can support a startup at that early stage.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. So crowdfunding is certainly one of the alternative funding forms in the US, right? You've got traditional VC, you've got angels as your first checks, you've got crowdfunding, which essentially enables non-accredited investors to invest in your startups. It's typically used by consumer-facing startups. So if you're a SaaS, you're a B2B, chances are it's not going to be an effective fundraising strategy for you. But if it's consumer and you've built a large loyalty base, it can work. However, you really need to think about whether or not that's the route you want to pursue. It's got benefits, but it's got its own challenges, right? If you go down the crowdfunding route, it's public. You're fundraising in public, essentially. So if it doesn't work, it's going to be even harder for you to get VC funding. because there's going to be a ton of questions around why you weren't successful raising crowdfunding from essentially your customers, right? You have to sell your startups first to your customers before you can sell your startup to investors. That's key because without the startups because without your customers, there's no revenue, and there's no revenue, there's no investors, right? So you need to be able to sell your startups to your customers. So a failed crowdfunding campaign can signal that nobody actually wants your startup. So you really need to think about that and, and be confident in your ability to execute on a successful crowdfunding campaign.
That's a really good point, Grace. Anyone else on the panel would like to touch on that before we have the last question for the evening? Okay, Adana, the last question.
Anand is asking, what is the current venture capital funding landscape for founders in Africa and the Caribbean? And do you think there's a gap between early stage founders and those who are truly VC ready?
Alois?
Well,
Yeah.
I don't have the insights on the Caribbean VC funding landscape. But as it relates to Africa, I kind of high level touch on it. And that actually was what spurred us to go about Startup Africa Ventures. We initially started off just being a VC firm, and then we since evolved to this Capital Plus model where we focus on ecosystem building, and venture funding. High level, the landscape on the continent is, as I said, last year, numbers are anywhere from 3.8 to 4.2, depending on the source. That is whether it's Breda or Partech or Africa, the big deal. But over the last 5 to 6 years, it averages around 3.1 billion. Now, Austin, Texas, that I call home in the US, gets more money than the entire continent of Africa that has over 1.4 billion persons and a combined GDP of 3.7, 3.8 trillion. And then of that comes into the continent from a venture funding standpoint, less than 20% goes to early stage. And less than 10% go to female founders. And fintech accounts for roughly 40 to 50%. So at a very high level, that's what it looks like. And part of the reason early stage isn't getting enough, and that's to the question of the gap, is that many founders are more focused on seeking capital, but they're not ready for venture capital, right? They haven't sufficiently de-risked their business. They're not the right signals that they can show investors that would then have an investor have the confidence to want to back them. And so it goes back to my earlier point of the hand holding that's required, the level of capacity building, continuous capacity building that's required. Governance is also an issue. I know a case where a founder, she's done well, has CNN Press and everything, was able to get 3 million committed from VCs. And when the first tranche came in, went and bought a luxury car. So you have those issues too that kind of hurt the landscape. But part of what we're doing and part of what seems to be the general view now on the continent, because last week I mentioned I was in Accra as a part of Timbuktu. So Timbuktu is a continental initiative that was kicked off in Davos at the World Economic Forum a couple of years ago. And it's to mobilize roughly 1 billion in innovation capital to support 10,000 SMEs, indexing on women and youth SMEs, and then scaling 1,000 startups to Gazelle level. So that's about 1 million annual recurring revenue, growing at 30% clip. And one of the things that was spoken to while we were in Accra, and this came from the Timbuktu team, the event was kind of driven by 500 Global, working with UNDP Africa. But the general thread is that the need to kind of focus on this readiness gap, because once you address the readiness gap, it then allows capital to flow in. So I think that's the biggest piece, the founder readiness, the venture readiness, and eventually the capital will come once the right structures and systems are in place.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Alois. I'll just add from the Caribbean context that the VC space, we're still really young. There are a couple funds that are operating right now. One in Jamaica, it's M Scale. If you attended our last webinar, you would have met Ugo. Another fund, Morrow Ventures, is in Puerto Rico. And if you follow Stephanie Pemberton, she's from Trinidad. She's one of the GPs. Those are the two that I know off the top of my head. What I would say though is most of the development banks, especially IDB, CAF, and IFC, they have fund of funds, and they are helping to build the VC ecosystem by investing in those funds. That said, what I'm also seeing is though, to Alois' point, is that there's less of an appetite to invest in fund ones. So emerging fund managers who are now launching their fund one, there's less of an appetite for that. So that said, I'd like to end the evening by allowing each of our panelists a closing thought or remark, and then we'll tell everyone good night. We'll start with you, Grace.
Just best of luck to all our founders. You know, it's not for the faint of heart, so kudos to you all for even thinking about starting a startup. It's grueling. So I just want to wish everyone the best and wanted to echo what was said earlier. You know, join FI Caribbean if you need that hand holding, that support. You're gonna get support from validation through really getting you to a point where you could be a fundable company. The FI program is not theoretical, right? It's not a bunch of how to do this. It's literally going to force you to pick up the phone, call your customers, and get the validation that you need. And will help you get a little bit closer to success. So yeah, that's it. And thanks all for having me.
My pleasure, Grace. Thank you so much. Jen, would you like to go next?
Yes, of course. Yes, I just kind of it was my idea to also kind of mention that it is a very difficult path for a startup to even think and fathom to create something out of nowhere, you know, or even solve a very big necessity for the region or locally where you are. But you don't have to do it alone, and, you know, take advantage of, you know, ecosystems, mentorship, all of this. It's not wasted. I think it will prevent you from making mistakes that are avoidable, and definitely you don't have to do it alone. And you know, connect with ISD, with Founder Institute, that, you know, are built, and we created this to help startups because we see the potential, we see the energy, and you know, the willingness to risk basically everything to create something amazing that will impact your surroundings. So yeah, you don't have to do it alone, and we're here always to help.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Appreciate that. Nikkei?
Yeah, I can build on that. I think surround yourself with people who've walked the path before. It was mentioned before that it is maybe difficult, especially if you're still bootstrapping, to get the advice that you might want to. But you'll be surprised how helpful people are who've been in your shoes and who've walked the path and who know the pains of being a founder and having a startup and having to figure it out maybe for the first time, right? And there's a lot. I would say don't worry too much. Know what stage you're at with your startup, right? First of all, you need to have a product or a service that people want to give you money for. And that's what you should focus on at the beginning, first and foremost. Then from the legal perspective, get the fundamentals right. And don't worry too much about the details. The problems and challenges will come as you grow and scale. But at the beginning, get the fundamentals right. And you won't get an award for having the best legal setup. And no customer will wonder if you were super early with your trademark application, So do everything, but be mindful of doing things at the right time. So that would be my closing remarks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nikkei. Alois, you're closing us off this evening. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, so I'll close more as a founder. The journey is a difficult journey as a founder. So I would say first, do all you can to maintain your mental health. You would have a lots of ups and downs along this journey. But if the problem you're trying to solve is one you're passionate about and you're truly committed to, it would help you stay grounded. Seek out expert advice, expertship. Don't build in isolation. There are others out there that have walked this path that you're trying to walk, and they can help you. Some can even not only help you avoid the mistakes that they've made, but even help open doors for you. And some could even, once they see how infectious your drive and passion is, join you in helping you build what you're building. And then most importantly, going back to what we spoke to earlier, which is, and there's many different ways you can talk about it, which is like putting the cart before the horse, trying to do too many things at once, trying to think about building for down the road when you haven't solved the problem that's right in front of you now. And that goes to the reference, not ball in the ocean. It also goes to the reference rule of one, right? So stay as myopic as you can and be delusional in your process.
Thank you, Aloha. So on behalf of the FI Caribbean team, I just want to thank everyone again. Thank you to all the participants. Thank you to our panel. Thank you for staying on later than planned. This was a really engaging conversation, and I'm happy that we had an opportunity to expand the Q&A and get all the questions in. So everyone, have a great night and see you again next month for our next webinar. Good night, everyone.